Today, a travel insurance cheat gets a one-way ticket to jail.
Mr. Gordon's criminality, as far as I'm concerned, currently stands at one of the most prolific fraudsters that I've managed to come into contact with.
A badly executed motor claim runs out of gas.
Unfortunately, they hadn't got their story straight. One talked about it happening in the afternoon, and the other one said it happened in the evening. That's not possible.
And a false injury demand gets the treatment it deserves.
It didn't actually happen. You'd get thrown further off your seat if you had hiccups.
Holidays should be a time to kick back and relax. But if the brake starts to break down, then travel insurance is there, whether you need help during or even before the holiday. Unlucky Umesh Gordon's holiday never even got off the ground. He had to cancel his entire trip after having paid in advance for flights and accommodation.
He submitted a claim for a medical condition which meant he couldn't go on his holiday, and it was in the region of £4,500.
Matthew Crawford Thomas is Intana's fraud manager. Intana is a claims management specialist, handling claims on behalf of insurers. The company required Gordon to back up his claim with relevant paperwork.
All the documentation that he'd submitted to us appeared legitimate.
But then, a chance conversation led Matthew to seriously question the claimant's version of events.
It was a off-the-cuff remark I made to a fellow fraud expert that enlightened me that Mr. Gordon had actually submitted a claim in 2004 for very similar or the same circumstances.
Maybe Gordon was incredibly unfortunate when it came to summer holidays. Either way, Matthew decided to take a closer look at the details.
Flights on all occasions for all the claims that we'd found were all legitimate flights with various airlines.
So far, so genuine. But it turned out that Gordon was winging it with the air travel.
He was prepared to lose a little amount of money, anything between £80 to £150 on those flights, because the accommodation that he was reportedly booking was absolutely and 100% fake.
The flight tickets may have been real, but the accommodation bookings, which made up the bulk of the compensation payouts, were forged, as was the other paperwork.
Mr. Gordon submitted bank statements and medical certificates that, on the face of it, were legitimate. However, further investigations found out that these documents were, in fact, totally fraudulent.
As far as Matthew was concerned, Gordon had never had any intention of going away and had never been ill. Membership of the Insurance Fraud Investigators Group allowed Matthew to widen his investigation into Gordon. His findings were explosive.
I uploaded data into their system of the fraud that I'd found for Umesh Gordon. This uncovered fraud dating back to 2004 with 28 claims for 9 insurers amounting to over £113,000.
This was jumbo-sized insurance fraud.
Every single claim from 2004 to 2011 was for the exact same modus operandi. He sustained an injury and/or illness. All the doctor's stamps were stamped by exactly the same doctor.
These dodgy medical certificates were submitted to prove he was too unwell to go on holiday. The sickening scale of his fraud meant investigators started to look into his background.
They subsequently found out that he actually worked for Leicester City Council Benefits Department. We then secured his holiday record for the period that we knew he was committing insurance fraud, and it subsequently transpired that he didn't in fact have the right amount of time booked off for the holidays in question.
Far from being too ill to go on holiday, this proved Gordon had been well enough to work his normal 9 to 5 in the office. Matthew wasn't prepared to let Gordon just walk away from his travel insurance con.
To find such an array of fraud dating back over such a long period of time, I felt that it was personal and needed to be brought to justice. I personally wrote 28 statements, which totalled over 60 pages.
The move was to present his findings to IFED, the City of London Police's Insurance Fraud Enforcement Department.
They arrested Mr. Umesh Gordon, at which point he denied all criminality, and said that it looked like someone had either stolen his identification or actually stolen his laptop.
Trying to portray himself as a victim was just one more deception, but Gordon had reached the end of the road.
Upon further investigations of his laptop, they found a drive with a big note on there saying insurance claims. It was at that point that Mr. Gordon, I believe, gave up the ghost.
Having worked to exorcise the fraud from the start, Matthew was there in person to see the conclusion of the case.
I attended Leicester Crown Court for the sentencing of Mr. Umesh Gordon.
Justice was finally served in the £113,000 swindle.
The judge gave him 2 years due to the fact that he had actually admitted fraud sooner rather than later. He is currently at Her Majesty's pleasure. Mr. Gordon's criminality, as far as I'm concerned, currently stands at one of the most prolific fraudsters that I've managed to come into contact with. Bearing in mind what he did for a living, for him to submit such a large amount of claims to the industry for such an elongated period of time, it beggars belief, to be brutally honest.
As does the decision to risk his successful career and reputation by committing fraud.
It just goes to show that no matter what you do for a job, people are always prepared to commit insurance fraud if they think they can get away with it, but not on my watch.
Later, Bus CCTV puts the brakes on a claim for multiple serious injuries.
Do you see any contact with the eye or ribs of either of these people on the bus? No, because it didn't happen.
And justice is delivered to a postal fraudster.
Mr. Copman was quite upset after his arrest, and I think that's probably because there was such damning evidence that we recovered on his computers.
Recent figures show that there were nearly 150,000 road traffic accidents reported last year in Great Britain. Clearly, some fraudsters think they can slip in a false claim unnoticed. But without a watertight cover story, their chances are sunk from the beginning. Ursula Jallow is LV's Head of Financial Intelligence and Crime Solutions. Ursula's team recently investigated a claim from a Mr. Williams, who said he'd been involved in an incident with an LV customer, Mr. Lee.
We had a call from Mr. Williams to let us know that he'd had an accident. He explained it was a significant one and that it happened at a crossroads where he'd collided with a third party.
Mr. Williams was driving east in his Vauxhall. Driving south was Mr. Lee in his BMW. At a set of crossroads, it was alleged that both cars collided. As further details emerged, it became clear that LV was dealing with an extremely high-value claim.
Within both those cars at the time of the accident, they alleged they both had 3 passengers each. So we actually had a total of 8 personal injury claims as part of this claim. As a result of that, our actual total claim by the end of our investigation was around £500,000. That is a significant amount of money.
It certainly is. But right from the start, there were doubts about the £500,000 claim.
A couple of things that absolutely didn't add up about this claim was, based on what was described, it was a significant accident with extensive damage. We had no witnesses and we had no emergency services called. That's unusual.
You're telling me? Unusual, if not suspicious. With the amount of money on the line, further investigation was needed and a forensic engineer was appointed.
Insurers use forensic engineers for a number of things, but mainly actually to clarify what happened in the event of an accident. They can tell by looking at the car whether the damage is consistent with the circumstances that have been described. And in this case, they absolutely weren't consistent with what we were told about the accident.
The location of the damage on the cars was significant.
The circumstances that were given meant that the damage had to be on one side.
The left-hand side of Williams' car and the right-hand side of Lee's car.
Actually, having investigated and looked at the vehicles, the damage was on the opposite side of where it should have been.
As shown on the photos. If that wasn't suspicious enough, there was also a major question mark over Lee's car.
The vehicle at the time was not even drivable. There was a significant transmission problem, and therefore it wouldn't have even been able to drive, let alone being involved in an accident.
The claimants were clearly trying to send LV in the wrong direction with a fake story about an accident that never happened. Further evidence then emerged about the undrivable car.
We identified that actually Mr. Lee's car had previously been involved in an accident that caused exactly the same damage to the vehicle that was now in our claim.
What a coincidence. For a car that couldn't be driven, it was apparently getting around a lot.
That claim was actually turned down with the other insurer because he'd failed to disclose some modifications about the car at the policy inception.
So the previous claim had hit the skids too. LV went back to the claimant to get his side of the story.
When we spoke to Mr. Lee about the information that we'd found about the previous accident, he still absolutely denied any knowledge of that accident happening.
More inconsistencies emerged when the passengers who were supposedly in the cars at the time were interviewed.
Unfortunately, they hadn't got their story straight. One talked about it happening in the afternoon, and the other one said it happened in the evening. That's not possible.
In fact, nothing about the claim was possible, and it showed.
This wasn't the most sophisticated. Their stories didn't match up. The cars weren't even drivable at the time of the claim. It just really was shoddy.
LV was determined to take the case further.
It was very clear that we needed to do a bit more than just not pay the claims.
They referred the case to the City of London Police's Insurance Fraud Enforcement Department, and the officers interviewed some of the people who'd supposedly been in the cars.
3 of the claimants confirmed that actually the accident didn't take place and their claims were absolutely fraudulent.
These 3 were given cautions, but the case against the 5 other men went to court. Williams, the driver of the car insured with LV, received 8 months, and Lee, the owner of the undrivable car, got 12 months.
LV were really pleased with this result. It's not okay to commit a fraudulent claim. And as a result of doing that, you will be found out and you will be put in prison.
DI Dave Hindmarsh of the Metropolitan Police's Roads and Transport Policing Command heads up an elite team of officers who combat vehicle crime.
If you are convicted, then you must expect that you will receive a custodial sentence.
For all the millions invested in technology to detect insurance fraud, sometimes you can't beat good old-fashioned police work, like in this case.
It came to us from one of our uniformed officers who was out on the street. He'd been doing routine patrols when he stopped a car. The car was registered to a London driver. In fact, it was registered to the person who was driving it, but the insurance policy was registered up north in Daventry with our driver who was stopped at the time as a named driver. The car was ultimately not insured, so it was seized.
But this wasn't the end of the story, not by a long way.
Several days later, the same officer stopped another car, virtually in the same circumstances, in that it was a London car with a London driver. However, the insurance policy was for an address in Daventry, again with this person as a named driver.
Either a lot of drivers were moving from Daventry to London and forgetting to update their details, or something more sinister was going on.
The officer who stopped the second car was immediately suspicious and started questioning the driver as to how they had obtained their insurance policy. and that had come through in an advert on an online market site.
The driver said that the advert was for an insurance broker, someone who, for a fee, uses their know-how to find cheap insurance for a client. It can be a legitimate business, but when it's fraudulent, it's known as ghost broking.
The ghost broking scam works because they offer cheap insurance. Maybe it's to people who are high-risk drivers, multiple penalty points on their license, etc. And you will provide your details and the cash, and you will not know what the ghost broker then sends to an insurance company.
All you can be sure of is that the ghost broker will change small details, so the quote from the insurer is cheaper than a policy with all the correct information.
The significance of these two policies which highlighted this ghost broker, both being in Daventry, is simply it is a lower insurance premium, it's a lower risk area. The difference will be hundreds of pounds between a policy taken out in London and a policy taken out in places such as Daventry.
To the unwitting customer, it appears that the broker has got them a much cheaper deal, even with the fee. The results of the investigation into the online advert provided the breakthrough that led to the next stage of the case.
We were happy that we'd established through our various intelligence indices where the advert had been placed and who had placed it.
That person was Milad Ahmed. In early 2013, Dave and his team moved in to shut down his fraud.
Right, this morning we're off to an address in East London.
Dave and the team arrived before dawn to execute the search. Raids are always scheduled early to ensure that the suspect is home.
Just keep cover up in the rear, would you?
It's important to guard the exits in case a suspect decides to make a run for it. Once everyone is in position, the officers are ready to make their move.
Hey, morning, please. Could you open up, please? Good morning. Thank you.
The occupiers let us in, so we'll just be explaining why we're there, and hopefully we'll start a search in the next few moments.
Although cameras didn't gain entry to the property during the search, it proved very fruitful.
The significance of the items that were found on that search showed that though the computer equipment had been used to take out policies of insurance for various people, so they're a really key piece of evidence for us.
After the search, the equipment was forensically examined and conclusively linked Ahmed to the fraud. His motor insurance con had finally stalled, and the next stop was court.
He pleaded guilty purely on the strength of the evidence that we had uncovered. He received 5 months imprisonment.
As far as Dave is concerned, the sentence sends out a strong message to would-be ghost brokers.
It's illegal, you can't do it, and if you are convicted, then you do stand the risk of going to prison.
First Group's buses carry around 1.7 million people every day, and passenger safety is a huge priority. Lee Ingram works for Transportation Claims, which handles claims for First Group. Every accident that results in a personal injury case against the company is thoroughly investigated. But not everything is as it seems at first glance.
It was alleged in early September 2014 that 2 ladies had been thrown from their seats due to a bus braking heavily.
This was in reaction to a car in front that had stopped to turn right. According to the claim, the women had suffered multiple serious injuries.
The injuries alleged were soft tissue injuries to the neck. One of the ladies was alleging an eye injury. There was an exacerbation of a pre-existing spinal condition, some injury to the ribs. All of these sorts of injuries would be commensurate with being thrown around a bus into the metal parts of the bus, the poles and the seats in front.
The value of the claim was therefore considerable.
Both of these claims combined would have been around about the £20,000 mark, and that would have covered the injuries themselves, the loss of earnings, treatment fees, and also the legal bills arising from bringing the claim.
According to First Group's records, the incident was real enough.
No one's denying that this is a genuine situation where a bus driver has had to brake heavily. So we've established that something has happened. The next thing we need to do is to prove whether the lady's injuries have been caused by this incident.
First Group buses are fitted with multiple CCTV cameras, so the next logical step was to check the recording from the day of the incident. All seemed normal at first.
So what we're seeing is a nice journey through what looks like sort of countryside type area.
The women in question are sat in the top right of the frame.
When I'm reviewing the footage, I'm expecting to see something like a zero-gravity space transmission with bodies flying around in slow motion, ricocheting off the inside of the bus.
Expecting to see being the operative phrase. The emergency stop is coming up, which supposedly resulted in multiple injuries to the women.
There's definitely an incident there. The bus has had to brake.
The passengers on the top deck and the driver can be seen reacting to the sudden braking. So let's see what happened to the two women. If what they claimed occurred is true, you're about to see something distressing. Brace yourselves. Oh, is that it? Am I missing something? According to the women, the incident had caused multiple serious injuries to the neck, eye, ribs and spine. But the footage put a very different spin on things.
There's nothing like what's actually been said. There's no sign of these two ladies being thrown from their seats, as has been alleged. We've got claims for rib injuries, eye injuries. Do you see any contact with the eye or ribs of either of these people on the bus? No, because it didn't happen. So this footage is just great in that it totally refutes anything that they're saying has happened.
No matter how many times you look at it, there's no way the footage shows an impact that could have resulted in multiple injuries. There's certainly no eye injury, although they may want their eyes tested if they think the footage backs up their claim. Their case is further undermined several minutes later when they reach their stop, get off the bus and stroll away, seemingly without a care in the world and showing absolutely no signs of injury. To make themselves seem more legitimate, the women had taken on legal representation.
I quote from one of the solicitor's comments, the force of the braking threw the claimant off her seat. That's utter bobbins. It didn't actually happen. You'd get thrown further off your seat if you had hiccups.
It was hard to swallow that the claim had come in at all.
Naturally, we sent the CCTV footage to the claimant's solicitors.
In most cases, that brings everything to an abrupt halt.
Unusually, we did actually receive a reply back this time saying that the claims were withdrawn. That's all very well and good, but it would be nice sometimes to just get a response saying, I'm sorry for wasting your time. I've been doing this job for 28 years and that's never happened yet, but a man's got to have a dream.
One day, Lee, one day. Ordinarily, when something you sent through the post goes missing, it's irritating. But if your whole business relies on posting products to clients, it could be disastrous. Missing post is something that Royal Mail takes very seriously. They've been providing a first-class service delivering our letters and parcels for the last 500 years. So when they heard about multiple postal losses affecting one person, they set up an investigation.
Royal Mail received around 90 claims for compensation of mail relating to mail being sent by Mr. Milan Cockman, being sent to various addresses throughout the world. What he was claiming that the items were actually lost in the post.
The claimant was involved in an online business which entailed supplying memory modules for digital storage. But there was a major problem that was affecting the business. According to him, almost every order he sent out was going missing. And he was having to claim back compensation from Royal Mail.
Because of the high volume of claims that were made by Mr. Cockman, Royal Mail Customer Services down in Plymouth have a separate investigation team, and they raised their concerns with myself, saying that the price that he was claiming, £50 per packet, and he'd been paid around £4,700, was excessive, and then I took on the investigation from there.
With such a large sum of money being delivered into his bank account, suspicions were raised. The investigation turned to the paperwork supplied by the claimant in support of each of the 90 payouts.
I looked at the invoices and they appear to be scanned.
This was immediately cause for concern, as claims require original documentation. The investigation then turned to the high-value products being sent out.
I then contacted the company where Mr. Cockman alleged that he brought them from, and they confirmed that the memory module value is in fact around £6 or £7 and not £50.
Was it possible that someone involved in memory storage could just forget the price of the product?
We also looked on the internet myself and again found that you could buy these memory modules for around £6, £7, not the £50 as Mr. Cockman had claimed.
By inflating the price by 8 times the true value, the claimant was posting a huge profit from the compensation payouts.
Having gathered proof of the fraud, I then contacted an inspector, a police inspector, and arranged for the arrest of Mr. Milan Cockman. We searched Mr. Cockman's home address and we recovered a number of computers which were forensically examined by Royal Mail's forensics team. And we also recovered a number of invoices which showed the actual amount Mr. Cockman had paid for each of the memory modules.
But the strongest evidence was, naturally, stored away digitally.
Mr. Cockman was quite upset after his arrest, and I think that's probably because there was such damning evidence that we recovered on his computers.
The case had fraud stamped all over it, and the claimant was eventually taken to court.
Mr. Cockman was found guilty of all the charges under the Fraud Act. He was sentenced to 4 weeks imprisonment, which was suspended for 18 months, 180 hours unpaid work, and had to pay compensation for £2,500 to Royal Mail.
The result of the trial sent out a strong message.
Royal Mail were very satisfied with the outcome of the case, and I think it shows that we will prosecute